So when I was in 7th grade, I moved to a new school in a new city. Can I have a raise of hands for everyone who's in 7th grade? Okay, a lot of you. So I was terrified of moving to this new school. I had been at the same school for the last 8 years, with the same friends, we played on the same soccer team, and we're in the same Girl Scouts troop. It's safe to say I was not well equipped for change. So when my mom told me I had to take a test to see what math class I would be placed in, I transferred all my anxiety about starting at a new school onto this one test. So, like any mature 11-year-old, I concocted a plan to get out of taking the test. Every time I passed my mother, I would cough or make subtle comments about how warm it felt inside, even though I'd already turned up the air conditioning. I hoped that over this week's time, I could convince her that I was way too sick to go and take this test. So, on the night before I was supposed to take the test, I knew I had to go all in. I came to her room and I said, "Mom, I really want to take this test. But if I'm sick on the first day of school because I pushed myself too hard to take this test, well, then I'm going to start the year off on the wrong foot." So my mom, who is a very nice woman, capitulated and called the school and rescheduled. On the first day of my math class, the teacher went over all the topics we would be covering that year. And one by one, I realized I'd already learned all this stuff. To be completely honest, I was thrilled. I was going to be able to coast through 7th grade math without ever having to study. My parents, on the other hand, a little less thrilled. And immediately, my mom called the school and scheduled another placement exam. I found out that I would be placed in the 8th grade advanced algebra class, and I was terrified. I hadn't made any friends yet at this new school, and I knew that if I was the one dork in the 8th grade math class, that making friends would get a little harder for me in the upcoming weeks. So, on that day that I moved into my new class, I was shaking. I spent 10 minutes outside the door of that classroom, walking back and forth, pacing, just trying to convince myself to take that step into the classroom. Finally, I realized I would have to enter the room eventually, so I just went in. Immediately, one of the boys in the classroom stood up and looked at me and he goes, "Are you lost?" I was terrified. I didn't know what to say, so I just giggled and kind of looked at the ground, avoided eye contact. He was not satisfied with that response, so he asked me again, "Are you sure you're lost? The elementary school's in a different building." I was so sad. Sure, I was 4.5 feet tall. I weighed maybe 70 pounds. I didn't look like your typical 7th grader, but I was not in elementary school. I was so offended. I wish I could tell you that this story ended with me wowing my classmates, earning their friendship, their respect, and that that boy who made fun of me is still my friend today. But I can't. The next week, I moved out of the state, and I never looked back. I'm not here to tell you that that's the way that you should behave. In fact, I'm here to tell you the opposite. But I want you to know that the people who stand on this stage, we haven't always been as confident as we seem today. We were the girl who ran out of her math class crying after someone called you an elementary school student. So, a year later, my middle school principal nominated me to go to a program at Yale, where I would learn how to be a better leader. I clearly needed that, right? I was a bit of a coward. So on the first night of that session, they asked us to come up with a list of all the problems that our world faced. And I thought, man, this is going to be a breeze. The world faces so many problems: child poverty, the lack of animals in sub-Saharan Africa, global warming. The list could go on. And I did. I wrote a list of maybe 50 problems that the world faced. And I felt so confident that I had aced this assignment. So the next morning, I walk into the session and they say, "Okay, you have your list. Now come up with a solution." I was so mad. I picked the war in Afghanistan. How does a 13-year-old know how to solve the conflict in Afghanistan? Well, there was one thing on my list that I felt really passionate about, and that was women's inequality. I have been very privileged to go to Hockaday since I was 4 years old, and I was taught there that I could do anything I wanted if I put my mind to it. But I knew that my peers didn't always get that same advice. And so I did some research, and to show you the lack of equality in leadership positions, we're going to play a little game. So can I have everyone in the room whose name is John stand up? Okay, about 4 or 5. You can sit down now. Thank you, guys. And now, can I have all the women in the room stand up? Okay, a little more, right? A little more than 4 or 5. You guys can sit down now. Thank you. So the New York Times 2 years ago did a study of the CEOs of the 1,500 largest corporations in America, the S&P 1500, and they found that there were more CEOs by the name of John than all the women CEOs combined. So I'm sure you Johns are a very bright bunch and deserve to be CEOs, but if this sample size is quite representative of the nation, there should be a few more women CEOs than those by the name of John. And if that doesn't scare you enough about the lack of women in leadership positions, hopefully this will. So, is anyone familiar with Elle magazine? A little bit, okay. So 2 years ago, they started a campaign called More Women. To show the lack of women in leadership positions, they took photos of high-level conversations and they photoshopped the men out of it. So here is the German Chancellor Angela Merkel at a cabinet meeting. Seems pretty interesting to talk to yourself, right? Here are the leaders of Europe. Here is, this one's quite ironic. This is Emma Watson. You guys may know her from Beauty and the Beast, or my Harry Potter fans may know her as Hermione. Woo! Here she is at the UN talking about women's rights. Yes, I did say that, women's rights, and she's sitting there by herself. And here is the British House of Commons, which is our equivalent to the US House of Representatives. These are the women who serve in the British government. The rest of the room would be filled with men. So I was quite appalled by what I saw. And so how do you tackle this issue? Well, I was 13. I couldn't eradicate all the systematic behaviors that hurt women in leadership positions. Instead, I thought I could inspire young girls to enter fields that they never thought were even open to them. So I came back from this program at Yale University, and I created a nonprofit, Story Power, Inc. I got together a group of my friends, and we started raising money. We went to corporations like Floor with Mr. Robinson. We went to individual donors, and we asked for money. And eventually, we raised over $10,000 to buy books about and by inspiring women to donate to middle school libraries across Texas. And so, once we had raised that money and we had donated these books, well, I've been to a library, I'm sure many of you have, and those books might sit in a far corner just collecting dust. So how do we get these books to come to life? We decided to approach the head of DISD libraries and ask her, can we run a program in your summer schools? I was 13 at the time, and I am very surprised to this day that she said yes. We started in Thomas Edison Middle School. Is anyone here from Thomas Edison? No? Okay, but the school, so we worked with the summer school students. These are students who had either failed 2 or more classes or had problems with truancy. And each week we would pick a different topic, whether that was women in STEM or women in the arts, and we would read from these set of 10 books. Once we were done with our reading, then we would do activities to engage the students in these fields. When we did women in military, we learned about all the military terms and the global conflicts of the day. We did women in arts. We had everyone draw portraits in the style of Frida Kahlo. And we hope that we can inspire these students to go out and pursue these fields that they may have never known were even available to them. So after that summer, we were able to have 3 more summer programs in the next 3 years. And I was really excited about this. But at the same time, I heard a lot of people say, well, you're too young. You're not qualified enough to handle such a big topic. This is women's inequality. It faces 50% of the population. You're 13. You don't have a solution. And I'm not here to tell you that I do. I don't have the solution. I probably don't even have a solution. But what I'm here to tell you is that it's okay if you're 10 or you're 13 or you're 18 to participate in these high-level discussions. In fact, you bring something to the table that none of the adults in the room do, your age. You know what students are like. You know that they like Snapchat and that few of them have Facebooks, and you know what a fidget spinner is, right? Yeah? Okay, so you bring something to the table that the adults who bring other things don't. And that brings me to my next point. This year, I had the great opportunity of serving on the Mayor's Task Force on Confederate Monuments. I was the youngest member on the task force by several decades, and I was terrified to show up. I didn't have a PhD or a law degree or any knowledge of sculpture at all. In fact, the only thing that I knew was how to use Snapchat, and even that I'm pretty bad at. So I was like, why am I here? No one wants me to be talking here. But I found that the task force was so receptive to what I had to say. I brought something to the table that none of the other people with PhDs or law degrees did. I brought the knowledge of what students in Dallas feel about these monuments. And I would like to say that I contributed a lot to this task force. I clearly didn't do it on my own. I have a lot to thank my chair, Miss Waters, who is here today, and I'm not just saying it because she's sitting in the audience, but I also want to thank the members of the task force for just being so open and receptive to what the youth in Dallas want to say. And you all have a very unique and important voice. I imagine you have great ideas and great perspectives on some of the nation's most complicated topics. And so I encourage you to take your seat at the table. It's okay if you're scared. You know, when I walked into the mayor's task force, I was terrified, just like I was when I was walking into my 8th grade math classroom. But you have to realize that you bring something so important, and that you just need to cast off your fears and walk in the room. So I encourage you, if you have an opinion, if you have an idea, take a seat at the table with the adults and make your opinion known. I promise you, the world will be better for it. Thank you.